Welcome to the Why I Do show, and today I'm privileged to have with me Andy Fieldhouse from the Team Space. Andy, how are you going?
Good, thank you, very well. Pleasure to be here.
Brilliant. Now, your business you run primarily in the UAE, although you're from the UK, I understand. Whereabouts in the UK?
I was born in Worcester. I actually spent most of my childhood overseas as an expat. My father was a British Airways manager, so lived all over the world. Went to London, so a bit of London, a bit of Worcester. Parents live in Berkshire, so kind of everywhere really, but in England.
It's amazing how we all go back to them, isn't it? You know, back to the home, even though we spent so long apart. I remember seeing you speaking at a British business group networking educational thing, and I remember you blowing me away a little bit with your knowledge in the sort of team space, oddly enough. And then obviously years later we reconnected again.
Yeah.
And you were recently sharing in one of our sessions why you've chosen to really work for yourself instead of a company, and why specifically the whole team thing is so important to you. So I just thought I'd just give you this platform really to share it with the hope that maybe you can motivate somebody else to either go and make the same difference or work for themselves as well. So over to you. Why have you chosen to do what you do?
Yeah, it's taken a long time to answer that question, and I kind of started doing it before I kind of knew the answer. It was a little bit cart and horse, really. But and I think sometimes it takes time in your life, you know, of thinking time to work things out. But I'll take you back. Really, my story begins, I guess, in terms of my, working with teams. My story begins when I was 8 years old. As I said, I was an expat kid growing up overseas. We were living in Bahrain at the time. And my parents had this decision about the future of their children in terms of education. And there wasn't anything locally that we could have gone to in terms of schools. So they decided we had to go to boarding schools in the UK. So, I was sent to this boarding school, very nice boarding school in Worcestershire. And when you're 8, you don't really understand. You kind of go with what you're told, and your parents tell you to do this thing. And so off I went. And that stamp on my life of that first day of going to this strange school in a cold country, and I was like, whoa, what's all this? It's kind of sometimes, the worst day of my life, but also the best day of my life. And in the context of teams, my team, my family, through no fault of their own, had to leave me with this other team, with this strange school, with these strange people who I didn't know. And it was terrifically lonely, as you can imagine. And I didn't really understand it. And I missed dreadfully my family and my team. And what it gave me was this real sense of loneliness and abandonment, and not being clear about what I was there to do and why I was there and how to do it and who to talk to. And, British public schools of those days were extremely old-fashioned, and it was very much stiff upper lip, get on with it, and don't bother anyone else with your problems. I learned to cry in silence at night because I couldn't show my emotions to people around me and express what was going on. And it was a very, very difficult experience to go through. But it was the making of me, and for lots of reasons I won't bore you with, I actually had a great time in the end. But what it gave me was a strong appreciation of what it's like to feel alone in a team. And I just don't think anyone should or deserves to feel that. And what unfolded for me was a lifelong desire to belong to teams, starting with sports teams at school. And I thrived on the rugby field. And, that sense of belonging to something where you were very, very clear about what you're there to do, and having each other's backs, and especially with rugby, which is a contact sport. So there's a level of physicality which you don't get in the corporate world, which adds a layer as well to that experience. And that moment before kickoff, when you're in the changing room, you've got your arms around your buddies and you're looking each other in the eye, and you trust that they've got your back and that you're going to do the best to support them in their role on that team, is an incredible feeling. And then going into work, I always loved, being part of teams, and I learned a lot about the corporate world in, my years working in the UK. And then when I came here, I had the good fortune to get a job which allowed me to work on teams. And I started doing team building programs. I learned to become a coach, a trainer, and my passion for this topic comes from a desire to not let people have the same kind of feeling that I know is so damaging and so draining. And so I feel extremely privileged that I don't have a job, but I think I have a calling, and I feel called to this work that I do to support teams and not let them down and not let people go through that kind of thing, and to help them achieve that kind of greatness that can happen when everything starts to work and you start to achieve things, and you know that the score is going to take care of itself if you get your team firing, and you consciously and intentionally work on the relationships that will bring you together and allow that kind of supportive, commitment to happen.
Jess, I'm listening to you here, and two things show up for me. One is when I was younger, I was always in teams, swimming squads and all that kind of thing. And then later in life, I took up kite surfing, which is very individual, and I stopped really doing any sort of team sport. And then about 3 years ago, I got re-involved again in underwater hockey, which is probably one of the most elite team sports, because you really can't do it on your own, because you're always holding your breath, right? And you run out of air and you've got to pass to somebody. And I remember walking out of the pool, first thing smelling chlorine, which I hadn't smelled since I was a kid. And then the other thing, just this amazing warmth to the bonding of a team.
Yeah.
And so, it's really singing to me what you're saying. But the other thing is, I've worked in, when I came out of uni, my first job was in recruitment. And I remember being in a team where really I didn't feel like a team member. It was horrible. There was all this horrible pressure. People look after themselves rather than the team. Didn't feel part of it, and I hated it.
Yeah,
absolutely hated it.
I think there's something there. I work with a lot of sales teams, and I've been in a lot of sales teams, and there's something there about the definition of a team. A team is a group of people with a common purpose and an interdependence and a reliance upon each other to achieve that purpose, right? And I think a lot of sales teams, are structured as groups, and in fact they're not that interdependent, and they're given individual targets. They're a bunch of people all trying to sell, and they're given individual targets and incentives, and they're not structured to cooperate with the people around them. And depending on the structure and the level, there are some that are commission only, some that are basic commission. There are some with some element of group commission incentive. It does depend. And so that on one side, I'm not surprised you felt like that, because I see that a lot, and I've worked in recruitment, and I know what it's like. And then on the other, there are things you can still do to kind of galvanize. Maybe you need to change the structure of the incentive a little bit, but you can still speak to that deeper purpose around why they're doing what they're doing, and create a sense of common ground and common purpose to support each other. And it's also about finding the right people in the first place, who buy into that concept of team, rather than the maverick narcissist. Unfortunately, I was at a session recently, and they talked about the narcissism pandemic, where it's very much, every man for himself, and I care more about who I am and what I am and how I look, than anything else. So anyway, that's a comment for you.
Yeah. So just to help people watching the show, if they were to see we talk about triggers a lot, don't we? If you were to hear somebody complaining of XYZ, what would be a good trigger that, hey, you know what, Andy's the guy? That would be a watch out signal in a team where they're nowhere as efficient as they could be, and that's where they should be reaching out for some sort of assistance.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be reaching out. It just needs to be recognized. I think the first thing is awareness. And Eckhart Tolle says awareness is the greatest agent for change. And once you become aware, then you can do something about it. Too many people and teams, unfortunately, exist in a state of either denial or ignorance around what is going on. And I know what it's like. It's a perpetuating kind of merry-go-round of problems and issues, and it's very hard to break out of them. So the first thing is to have awareness, and you can become self-aware as a team, or as an individual. And sometimes it's as simple as just listening to this and going, actually, let me have a little think about my situation.
Mm-hmm.
So once you create that level of awareness, I can only work with teams that kind of know where they are and have that awareness, and then they get to a state, oh, okay, we are in a certain place, and we want to be somewhere different. And that might be because of, how much politics is, how much are people putting up barriers and walls and protecting themselves and looking over their shoulder because they're scared of some form of retribution or ridicule because of anything they might say or do. And that's a warning sign in itself. Can you not have a conversation without it turning into an argument? Is everyone really clear about what is expected of them and what's okay and not okay in terms of their behavior? Do you know where your goals are and are you being measured? Do you know what you're there to do? What's your higher purpose? If you can't answer these questions, then that's awareness around you maybe could be better, could be different. And, it sometimes isn't, there's a disaster happening. Yes, sometimes you get culture clashes. Maybe there's been a merger, a restructuring, there, a change in circumstance, change of leadership. Something has happened in the myth or the story of the team that has shifted the situation, the energy, and there's something, and that's that awareness. From there, you have a choice, and you identify your present reality, and do you want a different future, and how different? Very different, slightly different, doesn't matter, but and how do you get there? Now, there are things you can do yourself. You can read my book. There's all sorts of stuff out there on the internet. You can answer any question within 17 minutes these days. So there's stuff you can find for yourself to try and shift your team in the right direction. But sometimes you can't do it by yourself. Sometimes you all are part of the problem, and therefore you do need some help. And that is where I would come in and help teams if they're struggling.
So one thing what occurs to me is how influential is the personality of not the team leader, but the person who's above the team, the boss, the CEO. How does that play into the team? Do you find, and I know this is a bit of an off the side question here, but do you find that you have cohesive teams if the person above, the boss, is not that kind of person, or do you find there any sort of relationship between that at all?
Yes, definitely a relationship, and very strong relationship, and everything comes from the top in terms of dictating, well, not dictating, but creating culture, creating ethos, purpose, behavior, what's okay, what's not okay. And people will look to the top, and they will look to the leader, whether it's the leader of the team or that leader's leader. The chain exists, and good or bad. I mean, I've worked with teams where I've seen terrible leadership behavior, and I've refused work because I see it. If I don't think that the leader's head and heart is in the process and willing and desiring to change, I can't help the team. It's that important that the leader is as on board, if not more so, than the team. Often it's the leader who is the sponsor and the instigator of the change and wants things to be different. And so therefore, they're trying to drag the team forward and go, come on. And in coaching, we talk about crossing edges. And this is a metaphor for life, going over the top of a mountain or a little hill. This could be as simple as, oh, I'm hungry. What do I have for lunch? I've got to make a decision. Could be, where's our new office going to be? How are we going to work virtually in the future? There's all these things. And you often find that leaders identify the other side of the edge and they cross that edge whilst the team is all still over here, and they're like, we're not going anywhere, we don't, and they're like, well, why isn't everyone coming with me? Because you haven't secured their buy-in, you haven't given them an opportunity to speak, if you ask questions and all this kind of stuff. So sometimes the team is over the edge and the leader isn't. The leader is refusing, and the leader is maybe unaware and blinkered, and it's very difficult for the team or the individual within the team to say, "Oh, excuse me, you need to come over over the top with us." And I think That's probably the most common question. When I do sessions with groups or online, keynotes and webinars and things like that, one of the first questions I get is, "I've got a bad leader. What do I do about it?" It's unfortunately all too common, and it's a very difficult question to answer. But it's very important that the leader, is part of the process.
Interesting. Wow. So I got one more question for you, Andy, before we finish up, and you'll probably remember this. I think we're around similar ages. I'm guessing. So if you were on a desert island, who would you choose to have on it with you? With the exception of our immediate family, because otherwise we get in trouble if we say anyone else.
Yeah, you're right. So this is this Desert Island Discs radio show.
There you go, right?
I listen to the podcast. I absolutely love it. I'd love to be a guest one day. I think it would be wonderful. It's the longest run. I think it's the second longest running radio show. It's been going for 75 years.
Wow.
So is my wife listening to this?
I don't know, but I'm trying to think. Are you 75 years old?
No, I haven't been listening to it since the start. No, I did. Who would I choose? You know, I went down the route of the practical, and I'd say Bear Grylls, because you know, he would be able to make the fire, build the shelter, catch the fish, look after us. You know, we'd make a good team. He'd have some good stories to tell. He seems like a nice bloke. And then I thought, well, come on, this is a theoretical thing. I'll be fine. I'll have this beautiful hutch with this, you know, all this food, and that won't be that. So I won't need him. And I think I don't know. I'd like one of my ancestors. I'm so curious about, you know, my ancestors, and just my mind is blown by the concept of when, you know, things were happening in history. My lifeblood was there somewhere. You know, were they part of it? Were they not? Were they just farmers in Yorkshire? Were they on the battlefield? Who knows? But I would just be really curious to meet some of my ancestors and sit and chat to them.
Interesting. Brilliant. Andy, thanks so much for your time. And obviously we'll put away that people can get in touch with you should they need to. But mate, good luck going forward. I think it's a very noble thing you're doing. And as someone who's been in a team that was rubbish, I wish you'd been there then. And I'm sure you'll be making a difference going forward, mate. So thank you for your time. And anyone who's listening, thanks a lot. See you soon. Cheers, buddy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.